The high desert was silent when Scott Jones stepped out of his old pickup truck and felt the cold morning air settle around him. He had come here with nothing but a map, a borrowed tent, half a tank of gas, and a dream he thought he had lost long ago. But nothing prepared him for what he would find on this land. Nothing prepared him for the moment that would change everything. Scott was 26 years old and broke in every possible way. 8 years of working ranch jobs across Oregon had drained the fire out of him. He used to imagine a future full of possibilities. But after his father died and medical bills swallowed everything the family had, those dreams faded. All he wanted now was simple. A small piece of land. A place where he could finally start a life that belonged to him. So when he saw the auction listing, something inside him said go. Minimum bid, $25. High desert. No buildings, no water rights. Remote and forgotten. Most people laughed when the listing came up at the community center in Burns. Some shook their heads like it was a bad joke. But Scott raised his hand before he even understood why. And just like that, with one quick nod of the auctioneer, he became the owner of 240 lonely acres nobody wanted. He drove all day to reach the place. The gravel road turned to dirt. Then the dirt turned to a faint path. Then the path disappeared completely. The desert spread out in all directions like an ocean made of dust and sagebrush. Strange volcanic rocks rose from the earth, like the bones of some ancient creature. The nearest town wasn't really a town at all. French Glen, population 12. When Scott stepped out of the truck and looked around, silence swallowed him whole. No fences, no footprints, not even an old post to mark a boundary, just emptiness stretching across the horizon. It was hard and unforgiving, but it was his. And for a moment, that was enough. He made camp as the sun dropped behind the ridges. The orange light painted the desert gold, and the wind carried the dry smell of sage across the open land. That night, under a sky so full of stars it looked like a river of light, Scott felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real hope. But just before dawn, everything changed. A sound woke him. Not the rustle of a rabbit or the quick scratch of a coyote. Something heavier. Slower. Struggling. Scott reached for the rifle beside him, heart pounding, and rolled out of his sleeping bag. The sound came again, closer. He clicked on his flashlight and swept the beam across the desert. At first he saw only darkness and sagebrush. Then something moved near his truck. Something big. Scott pointed the light toward the movement and froze completely. A horse stood at the edge of his camp. Not a healthy horse. Not even close. This one looked like it had been carved down to bones. Its ribs stuck out in sharp ridges beneath a filthy coat. Its legs trembled like they could fold at any moment, and its head hung so low it almost touched the ground. Dried mud and burrs clung to its mane. Old wounds marked its legs, and a fresh infected injury on its shoulder oozed slowly in the cold air. The horse didn't run. When Scott stepped closer, it didn't have the strength. It just looked at him with desperate eyes, eyes that seemed to understand that this was its last chance. "Easy," Scott whispered. "Easy, boy." He slowly reached for a metal pot and filled it with the only thing he could offer, water. When he held it out, the horse drank like it hadn't tasted water in days, maybe weeks. The trembling in its body shook the pot in Scott's hands. He filled it again and again until half his supply was gone. Then the horse lifted its head, just a little, just enough to meet Scott's eyes. And something passed between them, something that made the desert feel less empty. "Where did you come from?" Scott asked. There were no tracks, no ranches, nothing living for miles. The horse swayed, barely able to stand. Scott stepped closer and saw the truth in the flashlight's beam. This animal wasn't lost. It had been abandoned, left to die. And it had used the last strength it had to reach Scott's camp. That was the moment he made the decision. "All right, champ," he said softly, giving the horse a name without thinking. "I'm getting you out of here, whatever it takes." It took every bit of strength and patience he had to guide the weak stallion toward the truck. Champ stumbled with each step, but he followed Scott as if he understood this was his only hope. Scott created a makeshift ramp using tarps and rope, then helped Champ settle with most of his weight leaning against the truck bed. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even safe, but it would work. Scott climbed into his truck and looked at the frail horse behind him. "Hang on, Champ," he whispered. Then he started the long, slow drive back toward the nearest road, unaware that saving this one broken horse would drag him into a mystery bigger than the desert itself. One filled with danger, secrets, and a past someone powerful wanted to keep buried forever. The sun was rising when Scott pulled into Burns, his truck barely rolling after hours of crawling over rough desert ground. Champ hadn't moved much during the drive. His head rested against the side of the truck bed, eyes half closed, body shaking from exhaustion. Scott jumped out the moment he stopped and hurried to the back. "We made it," he whispered, touching Champ's neck. The horse's skin twitched weakly under his hand. The veterinary clinic wasn't open yet, but the lights were on inside. Scott banged on the glass door with the flat of his palm. A woman in her early 50s, hair tied back and wearing dusty boots, opened it with a sharp look. "Is this an emergency?" she asked. "Yes," Scott said. "Please, he won't make it without help." One look at the stallion in the truck, and everything changed. "Get him inside," she ordered. "Now." Her name was Dr. Ellen Ramos, and she moved fast. Within minutes, Champ had an IV in his neck, antibiotics running through his system, and gentle hands cleaning the deep wound on his shoulder. Scott stood nearby, helpless but refusing to leave. "This horse should be dead," Dr. Ramos muttered while working. "Whoever owned him treated him terribly. Malnutrition, infections, cracked hooves, old scars. This wasn't an accident." Scott felt anger rise in his chest. "He came to me in the desert. No one's been out there for years." Dr. Ramos paused and looked at him. "You own that land?" "I do." She nodded slowly. "Then he found you for a reason." Over the next hour, Champ fought with everything he had. His breathing steadied. His eyes brightened just enough to show he was still trying. But when Dr. Ramos explained the cost of treatment, thousands of dollars, Scott's stomach twisted. He had only $18 left. "I can work," he said quickly. "I'll do anything. Muck stalls. Carry feed. Anything." Dr. Ramos studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "My assistant quit last week. I could use help, but if we start this treatment, you're responsible for him." "I know," Scott said. "I won't walk away." And that was how it began. The next 2 weeks changed everything. Scott worked from sunrise to late evening, cleaning kennels, hauling supplies, assisting Dr. Ramos, learning how to care for Champ. Every hour he wasn't working, he was at Champ's stall, brushing him, feeding him, talking to him. Day by day, the stallion came back to life. His ribs softened under healthy weight. His coat slowly regained its shine. The infection healed. The dull look in his eyes turned sharp and alert. Everyone who saw him said the same thing. "That's a special horse." Which made one thing clear. Someone had wanted him for more than simple riding. Champ had been bred for something bigger. Scott didn't know what yet, but he could feel it. People at the clinic began whispering about the mysterious stallion. Rumors spread fast, and ranchers called asking questions Scott couldn't answer. Where did the horse come from? Why was he out there? Who would abandon an animal this valuable? Scott began digging for answers. He didn't expect trouble to find him first. 3 weeks after Scott rescued Champ, the clinic door slammed open. A man walked in wearing expensive boots, a spotless Stetson, and a scowl that lined his whole face. "Where's Scott Jones?" he demanded. Scott stepped forward slowly. "I'm Scott," quote. The man looked him up and down with disdain. "My name is Roger Russell. I hear you've been asking questions about a bay stallion." Scott's heart skipped. "Yes, I found him on my property. I brought him here." "Your property?" Roger sneered. "You mean the worthless dirt you bought for $25? That was my father's land. Anything on it belongs to me." "He had no brand," Scott said calmly, "and you weren't there." "I was." "That horse is worth $50,000, Roger snapped. You think I'm letting some broke ranch hand walk off with him?" Dr. Ramos stepped between them. "Mr. Russell, the horse has no registration, no papers, and no proof of ownership. Legally, he belongs to the person who found him." Roger's jaw tightened. "I didn't abandon him. He escaped. I've been searching for him for weeks." "That's interesting," Dr. Ramos said, "since he came in, half-starved and near death." For a moment, Roger's mask slipped. His eyes flickered with something dark, fear or guilt. "This isn't over," he growled. Then he pulled out his phone. "Send someone to the Burns Clinic now." He stormed out. An hour later, a sheriff's deputy and an attorney arrived. What began as a simple rescue turned into a legal standoff. Roger claimed Champ belonged to him. Scott argued Champ was abandoned and unclaimed. The deputy finally made a decision. Until a judge ruled otherwise, Champ would stay at the clinic. As Roger walked out, he turned toward Scott. "You're making a mistake. I have lawyers. You have nothing. Drop this now." Scott felt the fear, but he felt something stronger too. "I'm not giving him back to someone who left him to die." Roger stared at him with cold, dangerous eyes. "You have no idea what you're getting into." Then he left, and Scott knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was no longer just about a horse. Someone had done something terrible. Someone who didn't want the truth to come out. Someone who wanted Champ silenced. But Scott wasn't walking away. Not after everything Champ had survived. Not after the horse had walked miles through the desert to find him. The hearing was set for 2 weeks later, but Scott knew he couldn't walk into that courtroom empty-handed. Roger Russell had money, lawyers, and a long history in the horse world. Scott had nothing but the truth and a horse who had nearly died in the desert. So he spent every free hour searching for answers. He went to the courthouse, pulled old property records, and studied everything about the Russell Ranch. He found documents showing the ranch had once been a respected breeding operation run by Roger's father, Douglas Russell. But after Douglas suffered a stroke and Roger took control, everything fell apart. Horses were sold in secret. Records didn't match. 5 horses listed in the breeding files had never appeared in any auction. One of them was a promising young bay stallion named Victory's Champion. Champ. Scott tracked down people who used to work for Douglas. Some were hesitant to talk, but when they did, their stories made Scott's stomach twist. Roger sold horses behind closed doors. He avoided paperwork. He owed debts to dangerous people. He shipped horses to places where no one asked questions. One former trainer said softly, "I always wondered what happened to Victory's Champion. He deserved better than what Roger was doing." Another worker whispered, "Some horses were taken away in the middle of the night. No records, no bills of sale. Just fear." Piece by piece, Scott began to understand. Champ wasn't just abandoned. He had been hidden, used, exploited. And someone had dumped him in the desert to die, because keeping him alive was too risky. But the truth didn't fully come out until Dr. Ramos got a call from Nevada. A vet there had seen news coverage of the custody fight. "We treated a bay stallion like him," the vet said. "He was kept at a breeding facility outside Winnemucca. Horses were bred without papers, no records, no inspections. When I complained, they fired me. Everyone said it was backed by a rancher in Oregon named Russell. It all fit, years of illegal breeding, hidden operations. Horses used until they were no longer profitable. Then dumped like trash. Champ didn't escape. He was thrown away. And somehow, half dead, he had walked miles back toward the land where he was born." Back to Scott. The day of the hearing arrived cold and windy. Scott walked into the courthouse with shaking hands. But Diana Finch, the legal aid attorney representing him, gave him a calm nod. "We have the truth," she said. "That's enough." Roger arrived in a brand new truck, wearing a spotless coat and a stare full of arrogance. His attorney carried a stack of papers, but none that proved ownership. When the hearing began, the judge listened carefully as both sides spoke. Roger's lawyer claimed Scott stole a valuable horse. He claimed Champ belonged to Roger's estate. He claimed Champ had simply wandered off. Then Diana stood. She presented breeding records showing Champ's birth. She showed auction documents proving Champ was never legally sold. She provided testimony from the Nevada vet about illegal breeding operations. She showed photos of Champ's condition when Scott found him. Skin and bones, infected wounds, hooves cracked to the core. Finally, she said, "This horse was abused, neglected, and abandoned. Scott Jones saved his life. He is the only responsible owner this horse has ever known." The courtroom was silent. Judge Holloway looked directly at Roger. "Do you have any paperwork proving ownership?" Roger hesitated. His jaw moved, but no words came out. The judge nodded once. "Then my ruling is simple. The horse known as Victory's Champion, called Champ, legally belongs to Scott Jones." Roger's face went white. "And," the judge continued, "this court is referring the matter to the district attorney for investigation into possible animal cruelty and illegal horse sales." Roger's lawyer tried to protest, but the judge had already closed the hearing. It was over. Scott had won. Life changed fast after that. Champ recovered fully. His coat gleamed like polished mahogany. His muscles filled out with strength. His eyes shone with the intelligence everyone kept talking about. Scott didn't know how he'd keep Champ on 240 acres of dry desert with no water or shelter. But one phone call changed that too. Gary, Scott's old boss, called him the day after the hearing. "You're the guy who saved Victory's Champion," Gary said. "Let's talk business." He explained that Scott's land sat on top of a strong underground aquifer. With the right permits and drilling, they could bring water to the property. Gary offered to finance it. "You've got the stallion," he said. "I've got the experience. We split the breeding income and build something real." For the first time in his life, someone believed in him. Scott agreed. 3 months later, the desert began to change. A well was drilled. Fences rose around new pastures. A barn took shape under the wide sky. Plans began for a small house, so Scott wouldn't have to sleep in his truck anymore. Every morning, Champ stood at the pasture fence, watching Scott with bright, alert eyes. Strong, healthy, alive. Dr. Ramos visited often. "You know what's amazing?" she said one morning, as Champ chewed hay beside her. He knew exactly who to go to. He walked across miles of desert and found the one man who would save him. Quote, Scott ran his hand along the stallion's neck. "He saved me too. I had nothing. I bought land nobody wanted. Then he showed up and gave me something to fight for." Rumors spread fast across Oregon. Ranchers lined up to breed their mares to Champ. Money started coming in. More than Scott had ever imagined. Roger Russell, meanwhile, faced criminal charges. His entire network of illegal operations fell apart. Over 30 neglected horses were rescued, many of them given new homes with ranchers who cared. As the years passed, Scott's ranch grew. Champ became the foundation sire of a bloodline known throughout the West, horses famous for loyalty, strength, and heart. And when Champ finally passed away at the age of 32, Scott buried him at the highest point on the ranch, where the wind carried across the desert and the sun rose every morning. The headstone read, "Victory's Champion, called Champ. He survived everything and saved us all." Scott stood there long after the sun dipped behind the ridges. Everything he had, the ranch, the land, his future, started with a $25 property nobody wanted and a starving horse who refused to die. Sometimes the greatest miracles come from the most broken beginnings. Sometimes the things everyone else throws away become the things that save your life. And sometimes a man finds his purpose in the middle of a desert when a lost horse stumbles out of the dark and chooses him.